figure out what the hell he's talking about. So I'm going to talk about some of the Daryl Barnett stuff. And then there's another guy out there named Big Mike Tanaka who has helped me a ton learning how to make sticks fly. And then the third topic will be Barnett and I put a lab radar out to try to figure out how much downrange energy is actually delivered at 60 yards. We thought that was a decent maximum distance for a Western setup. Because I get a lot of emails about, hey man, you're talking about shooting a 2,000 grain arrow, you know, it won't go 15 yards, blah, blah, blah. And I did not know the answer to, does a really light arrow at 60 yards, is it how efficient is that? Is a high mass projectile at 60 yards more efficient? I didn't know. But we found that out. So I'll talk a little bit about that. The first thing I want to talk about though is tank penetrators. So in the US military, if you're in a tank and you've decided what the tank penetrator is without testing it, and you shoot somebody's tank who's on the other team, and it bounces off the tank, they shoot back. So the US military is a lot more practical about their penetrators and what they deliver on target, because the target has to be killed or you get shot at. And I don't know in archery if we're thinking about the target being penetrated as much as delivering the system to the target. This kind of came up in the last year and a half, and then it's kind of his fault. I was okay by myself off in the woods. But, so they designed to penetrate a tank. That's the sabots coming off the side of what is essentially a very long, heavy arrow to penetrate tank armor. Because like I said, if you don't penetrate a tank, you lose the battle, or you might get shot at, right? The advantage the military has is an unlimited power supply. So that thing's going Mach 4.5. Easy on the math, Barnett. 5,000 feet per second. We do not have that luxury. We do not have an unlimited power supply. So in the military, they had the armor. They said this thing penetrates it, and we can make it go fast. We don't have that luxury in the archery business. We don't have that much increase in speed. We can gain 10 or 15 or 20%. We can't gain 1,000% to overcome some of the penetration challenges we have. I mean, we're talking about, you know, 300 foot per second goes pretty fast, right? For most of us. So that was the first thing I talked to Barnett about. And then, this is really where he's helped me a lot, is kind of understanding how sticks fly. So we're all kind of familiar with an airplane, except they have wings in the middle. But they all lift, they all pit. Don't do that again. So they lift, they yaw, they pitch around. So do these things. And if we don't tune our aero systems or design them around a strategy to make them fly better, this is exactly what happens. We've got this on high-speed video. The shaft comes out, and it is literally doing this going down range. If it's not tuned, if it's underspined, if the bow's shooting sideways, your shaft, it may look to you. So this is where we get tricked. Barnett says this all the time to me. We're visual creatures. So the speed kind of mentally overwhelms. You get used to that. If the first one goes like this, your brain doesn't have a comparative analysis to say, was that right? It hit the target, it went to the target. However, in flight and at impact, this is really hard when it hits. We're talking about something that's out. I mean, it makes impact and the tail's here. It wants to lever, and it just kills the penetration. So, from an aerodynamic standpoint, I don't know that we spend enough time bare shaft tuning, not tuning, really trying to get the arrows to fly. There's a lot of adjustability in bows now. I have one with the technology stuff, the jump screw, and kind of leans the cams a little bit. It's phenomenal. But I'm a big bear shaft guy, and once you get a bear shaft to fly, fletchings don't work. But if the fletchings are really if you have a bear, if you do this, okay, and then you shoot your arrow and it goes like that through paper, it's doing it with fletchings. It is. It's just the fletchings are overwhelming it a little bit. So it's coming off like this, and then all the way down range, it's wobbling. And then another thing that happens, not that anyone here has ever drifted in a ditch or drifted across the road into the other ditch just for the hell of it, but I have. So, in a car, you have additional power you can apply. Go in the ditch, go across the ditch, and come right back to the road. With these guys, at launch, they are decelerating instantly. They do not carry speed forward, they are slowing down. So if the arrow goes off the shot line, it comes back across the shot line, but not as an equivalent level to the other side. And it's constantly going, the shot line's here, it's constantly swim to the side. So that's where the bow tuning and actually getting the arrows all consistent and shooting the same way really, really matters. And then once again, they stabilize better so that at impact they're doing this and not that. I mean, that really is going to help your penetration, whatever your platform is. If it's not hitting a little wonky, and if it's not flexing on impact for flight, meaning if it hits a little bit off, it's also going to do this. It won't just lever. It's not a stiff stick. So it hits, energy starts here, starts transferring down if it bends, and it also cantilevers. It just kills your penetration. I'm not even talking about hard bone impacts. I'm not talking about sort of the crazy stuff I talk about doing and breaking humeruses and that. I'm not talking about any of that. I'm talking about thoracic shots, rib cage hits. We're still going to get it. It's hauling ass, and then it slams into something. It's not flying in the air the whole time. So it's a massive energy dump should the arrow not approach perfectly straight. So there's Daryl at the test lab. And that screenshot is what's known as a lab radar. It's about that big. You can set the distances from the muzzle, and it picks up the velocities as the projectile is flying out of your kinetic energy machine, which is known as a bow. I was pretty surprised with this tool. It's really a cool device. So you just stand next to it. It's going to scream at me. The box is here. You stand right here and you shoot. And the target needs to be further than whatever you're shooting. So if it's 60 yards, you want the target at 70, and you just got to hit the cone of the radar, which is pretty big. It just flies to the radar. And then the data comes back and it says launch speed, and then it'll say 20, 30, 40, 50. And then you can just do the math for kinetic energy and momentum and see what happens downrange. And once again, this was all curiosity to me about the 60-yard question. What's most efficient at 60 yards? Avoid my speaker there. There's a lot of data. So this is what comes out of the machine. So it isn't I'm not expecting y'all to drain that slide. I just want you to know there's a ton of stuff that comes out of this that you have to mine. It takes a while to pull it down. It's not just one line and all that. There's a bunch of different projectiles we shot. The first thing I want to talk about here is the speed erosion over distance. So you can see the chart has a 388 grain arrow at the top, trucking along at 294, and it lost 35 feet per second. And the heaviest arrow in the set, at 718, only lost at 222, but it only lost 14 feet per second. What we do, Fowler, that heavy arrow is going super slow. But what you're looking at when you see that small amount of speed erosion is a very consistent parabola over distance. You are seeing a projectile that is capable of flying kind of the same. You're expecting to have pin gaps that are the same, very consistent over distance. Whereas the lighter weight arrows, if y'all look at your pin sets, if you have multiples, you'll see them open. And you're seeing this reduction in speed. It's the drag of the shaft in the atmosphere. And the mass of the lighter arrows can't overcome the drag. We can go down a rabbit hole in hell in that, and I'm not going there today because it'll make everybody's head spin off. But I was kind of surprised at this. I expected it to be the same. In fact, I told Barnett, I said, they're all going to be about the same. And he goes, no, they're not going to all be the same. He already knew. But I was kind of flabbergasted by that. And I said, okay, well, nobody's impressed with 222 feet per second, Fowler, so what we do, right? So we went ahead and graphed it. That's the kinetic energy graph for all those arrows. The top line is launch kinetic energy, and the bottom line is 60 yards. Okay? So you see that the very light projectile lost 20 feet per second, I mean 20 pounds of kinetic energy, 16, right? And then the delta narrows as the mass of the system goes up. Remember, we're flying this into a target. This is just air. When the arrow hits, it's hitting something really hard. And we need all of the energy we can get. It's only 75 foot-pounds. It's not bullet kind of stuff, right? Super high, thousands of foot-pounds. We don't have anything to waste here. So if you look at whatever broadhead platform you're shooting, and there are published, some broadhead platforms publish what they think is the kinetic energy values to penetrate the flesh. If that number is 45 foot-pounds, and then you shoot at an elk at 60, and it only arrives with 58, we have a little bit of a mathematical problem there, because it's only got 13 to keep going. I was pretty surprised by this. I also expected it to be the other way around. I expected the kinetic energy to be about the same, and I expected 60. I expected the heavy mass projectile to pour off, because the speed was so slow. It's 222 feet per second. But it's been super fun to find out that I was wrong. So I also graphed the momentum, which is a much more simple equation. And you can see that as the mass goes up, the momentum also goes up. Once again, delivered at 60 yards on target with something that doesn't have a ton of momentum. We're not shooting, 2,000 foot-pounds when we got a lot to spare. We're 80 foot-pounds. It's just not that fast. So you can see the momentum values also creep up. So in the middle somewhere is probably the magic, if you're going to do math and you were going to pick something off a chart like this, you probably just go in the middle. Pretty good speed, pretty good momentum, not a lot of KE loss, right? And a high efficiency broadhead, preferably, so you can retain that 60 or 65 foot-pounds of energy. But it's a fun, I really am having a better time screwing around with Barnett doing the science stuff, because I'm a kind of a concrete person, and it's nice to see the math kind of show up, right? I don't think I have anything else. Oh. This is a pretty interesting observation here. So the momentum of the 514 grain arrow at 60 yards is higher than the previous two at launch. And if we're talking about shooting big stuff far away, that's a good thing to have. So this is that momentum value on, when I got my finger point up there, that 52 is the number at 60 for a 514. That's not a super heavy arrow, but it outperforms the previous two at launch. We're delivering more energy on target at a further distance, and it's known. It's just math. It's not no fights here, no whatever broadhead platform bow you shoot. I don't care. I was really shocked by the math. That one's probably the most telling thing, is to see what the 60-yard performance is. Like I said, I expected the graphs to go this way, and they did not. I think I'm done. So once again, back to what Ed says, an arrow is always flying. If it doesn't hit square when it hits meat, it's not going to go straight. It is flying through meat, which is a much more dense target. Let's just say plan A, right on the crease, lower 1/3, nothing major in the way. it's a much more dense target than air. It just is, and it's still flying. So if it's unstable in the air, it hits something harder, it becomes very unstable. And you see these redirects. I saw some stuff on camera the other day of some pigs that were being shot, and arrows were hitting here, and they were going. I don't know what, I wasn't with them, so I don't know what the platform was, right? And I don't see how that could be good for our sport. You can't just get through gear. Like I said, this study was more done around thousands of questions of people saying, yeah, I understand the heavy thing, but I can't shoot 60. Well, what happens at 60 because fast is going to be a better 60-yard projectile. And I just said, well, I've got a smart guy I can talk with and I'll ask him. So we got out with the lab radar. That's that. I was 17 minutes, I was supposed to get 30. Any questions?
Heavy arrows are, you recommend heavy arrows. I've seen your pods before.
I've seen your pods before, and you definitely recommend a heavier arrow
Sure.
for better penetration.
Yes, sir.
As opposed to a light, fast arrow.
Yes, sir. Yeah, perfectly flying and a broadhead doesn't explode. Okay, and the perfectly flying things are really pretty challenging. For the average guy, which is this audience is not the average people, but the people that y'all serve in the communities, the people that are 2 hours from an archery shop in Middle Saskatchewan or North Dakota or some places like that, really working on perfect arrow flight systems is a very difficult thing. It's not easy. I get 1,000 messages a month and nobody says, hey, great shot at the pig you killed, number 12 or whatever. It's all arrow tuning. They're all trying to figure out how to get their bows to shoot straight and improve their arrow flight, which really is, it's cohesive. You get a sideways 1,000 grain arrow, it's not going to do it, Dad. So we have to be reasonable here, right?
It's better
it has to
arrows
fly.
Better to tune your arrows than, I mean, you definitely want to tune your bow, but better to tune your arrows to your bow.
Absolutely. Right. We really do need the arrow flying straight. We can't have all the wobble stuff I was talking about. That's got to happen. I do. He asked if I paper tune with a bear shaft. I paper tune with a bear shaft at 7 yards. And then when I get one to shoot a bullet hole, I shoot every individual shaft that I have through paper, bear shaft, and I rotate the knock until they hit the plumb. And you have to accept that you're not that good. You're going to throw one. That's what fletchings are for, by the way. Fletchings are not to correct a terrible arrow off the string. They are to correct for you when you make a mistake or you're kneeling or it's raining. I mean, there's a lot of stress. Hunting's exciting or we wouldn't do it, right? And people, it's just better if the arrow's flying bear shaft. Pretty darn close. I mean, a tear like that will probably be okay. But you don't want something tearing that wide and the fletching's really doing this. The problem with that is we introduce a wing to the front. Okay? So with a field point, it's very aerodynamic. And so field points are liars. Even if you bear shaft, and even if you get a perfect bear shaft tune, you need to go shoot your broadheads as far as you can and see if they fly. Because these also drag. 3-blade, 4-blade, even mechanicals have some drag. And if it's close, they will drag a little bit. We've probably all shot arrows where you went, I can't figure out why, but it's just a little. It's not doing loops. It's not missing by 4 inches. But I can stack my field points and my broadhead shoots, out. If you don't have to admit it. You're a kind man. But I've been there, right? What the heck's going on here? My bow's supposed to shoot bullets until you put the bullet on the front that has wings. And it adds a different lift component. So remember, the broadhead's also rolling. Even if you shoot and hit straight fletch, they roll a little bit. So you've got broadhead catching wind up here, fletching catching wind back here, and if they're out of sync, they'll just skitter downrange.
The arrow and the broadhead are counters of each other, so they don't have any effect on each other. The front of the blade, they're counter pressures. So otherwise the broadhead would have to be tuned with the fletches. If you shot at high speed, right, and you're saying that the arrow apexes, and when it has an action, there's a reaction,
Yep.
right? And now it's hitting the target.
Okay.
And we've all seen arrows that would hit a target with an impact on right or left that wind might have influenced.
Yeah, right, sure.
So how far are you saying that the arrow would, are you talking about a bear shaft being able to apex out of control? Because there has to be some energy that's setting it off. Otherwise it would correct itself eventually.
If the bear shaft takes off sideways, it's never coming back. Is that the answer you're looking for?
The bear shaft? Well, with rotation, right? I'm just saying, are you talking about just bear shafts? Or are you talking about with a fletch?
With fletch.
Because there's two ways to guide an arrow, right? I can add a lot of point weight, the rest of it follows,
Right.
or I can correct it, and the right amount of rotation of the arrow corrects it. Most of the high-speed photography that I've done in my lifetime, most of that's 16 feet and it's over with. The counteraction of the apexing that happened, depending on the spine,
Yep.
corrects itself at 16 feet and then it follows it out. And I've shot high-speed photography clear out to 150 yards with a narrow depth of field, looking at it from the front and the back and tuning it.
How far out
But
do you think it
eventually,
stabilizes?
I'm sorry?
I've wondered this. How far?
16 feet.
Do you think it's
Most
stable?
most arrows correct themselves at 16 feet.
No matter what, 400 spine, 250 spine, everything's the same?
I'm in disagreement on just myself. I'm not trying to cause
No, you're
trouble.
fine. I learn something every time.
No, I've shot over 1,000 big game animals with a bow and arrow. So I've shot a lot of long range,
Yep.
and I've shot through everything there is with a fixed blade at distance.
Yep.
And at times, things I feel like are better tuned, and the bow that I shoot is tuned
Yep.
at distance. And I think that a lot of people forget speed. Speed has a lot of determining factor. You take momentum and you take the kinetic energy away. I mean, I shot 2 elephants with a bow
Okay.
and did a lot of penetration tests and shot everything else there is to shoot. And I really think that speed is a huge factor that a lot of people undercalculate. You may not be able to explain it, but I just shoot a 300 shaft full length with a 100 grain head, and I think this whole fallacy over lots of front weight, 26% weight forward, 1200 grain arrow, 132 pounds shooting at an elephant, I would have been better off shortening my shaft and speeding it up, and it would have had way more penetration. And I've tested that over and over and over again, which is against some of the math you're talking about, but just my personal opinion.
You're a little bit of an outlier though, because you're an expert at bow tuning and arrow tuning and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So
But
the
again, there's an action and a reaction, right?
Correct.
So the shaft has to have some energy that's sending it off of its path, right?
Right.
So eventually that has to correct itself. The shaft is stiff. It's as stiff as a spine.
If it takes off the shot line, will it ever come back?
If it's got a point on it, right, eventually the shaft has to straighten itself because it's got resistance, right? And there's an action, there's a reaction. So what you just said was, if I start to point it and then I send it off one way or another, eventually it corrects itself and eventually it's in a line and eventually that stiffness is straight and that stiffness is the counter to correct itself. So yeah, it will correct itself.
You're talking about the arrow flight will
Yeah.
stabilize.
Yes.
But will
And
it
so if
stay
I'm
on-
talking about 20 and I detune the bow and I shot it out left and I've got a broadhead that, because the end of the broadhead has a lot to do with, there are broadheads on the market that are, the way they get sharpened determine whether or not they do or do not fly right. The sharpening has been changed in order to work out them dynamically to where they can actually wind foil and
You've
work,
definitely
right?
been down the rabbit hole.
And then I'm also like a real fan of a 3-degree offset. Out of the studies that I did with the wind studies, like over at Boning and all of that stuff, having a 3-degree offset is where I think you don't have too much drag and you have enough correction.
Right. No, I'm with you on the 3-degree offset. We ran it up to 15, and we actually got 15. It was doing that. It was absolutely phenomenal. How crazy it was. But
They
I'm
will
with you.
fight each other if you've got something too big in the front. But
Right.
or again, like the shaft is stiff and it's got a spine and eventually it has to correct itself because it is straight
Right.
and there is no energy making it go left to right anymore.
Right. What the hell was I going to ask you? Well, I'll think of it here in a minute, and I will ask you that. Any other questions?
So weight versus speed. There's a point where they come together, and assuming you're hunting elk and you're hunting 60 yards, so that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
If if you put your 60-yard pin on that elk and he takes 3 steps, he may be closer to 70 now.
Yep.
And so with the speed, you're going to get a little forgiveness and you'll still hit the animal. With a big 600, 700 grain arrow, it's just going to completely miss. So at what point does the weight and the speed have to come together to make that perfect balanced combination? What is your opinion? I know you've done a lot of testing. Is there a cross?
I haven't resolved the animals change the game thing. In fact, I do believe that the most detrimental thing to our sport is white-tailed deer jumping the string, which is probably 95% of the time, if you slow them down. They're moving some, and they're not moving the same. There's been some videos out that say gravity goes this fast. Yeah, a Newton already did that. I mean, we got to stop with those. The animal's reaction is a muscular reaction, and their ability to get out of the way is trained by how much pressure they have, how many predators have been around, and where they live. You go to the King Ranch in Texas and walk around, those deer are kind of on dope. They're kind of calm. It's an 800,000 acre place. You go in the Midwest where they're highly pressured on public land, they're real springy, right? So that question, I don't know how we resolve it. I don't. I mean, it's a great question, and I don't know that we'll ever beat them, right? You could throw the hunter in there for being dumb, and they started walking and he shot anyway. Nobody will tell you they did that, right? But there's so many factors when you decide to punch the button. Rifles, everything, right?
In slow motion video, I've noticed 2 things when I'm shooting whitetails. If somebody stood with a paint gun over there and I shot at them, they would have plenty of time at 30 to 50 yards to move. It's 300 feet a second, right? Most of us are trying to strive for 300 feet a second. So there's 2 things that a whitetail does. Sometimes they see it and they'll duck down and out of the way, and the other one is they just hear it at the speed of sound and they tighten, right? But that's one of the most unethical things about animal behavior and seeing whether they're going to stand still long enough in order for you to have the flight time to them, you know?
And then the flight time is a great comment because, so we're talking about an arrow that's flight time is going to be reduced, right? But we don't know how far the animal's going to move. There's no, it's always 4.5 inches low. That will fix everything. The first poking young deer I ever shot at was on a place with jumping deer, and I aimed right here, and I hit right there. Unfortunately, he didn't drop. I shot that deer. He went 10 feet, and I yelled at him. I was so mad. It was terrible. And I think that's the biggest challenge we have as bow hunters in your example as well. You got an elk chasing a cow. You don't know when he's going to move. He's out of his mind, right? And the deer thing, the pigs are even worse. Those stupid things won't hold still for nobody. They add a component of shoot forward that's annoying. Sometimes they just run like a little barrel and go this way, and your shot was on the shoulder, and then they just run out of the way of it. So if there's anything that would encourage y'all to really learn to tune, encourage your customers to tune and get their arrows flying great, at least we know the factors have been reduced to the bow and the arrow are shooting as good as they can. And then you have to just hit the trigger and let it eat. I mean, there comes a point where you gotta shoot the bow, and the crap's gonna happen. Occasionally you're gonna bump one. They're gonna get out of the way. They're gonna get all the way out of the way. My friend shot at a diker 3 times in Africa, and he shot through dust 3 times in a row. He said it was unbelievable. It didn't even duck out of the way. He shot, and there was dust. It was gone. Diker. Yeah.
Diker. Small dude.
Little guys. They get eaten a lot. They're a little bit, jumpy about that stuff. Any other questions? Yep.
What is your peak FOC?
For what?
So for accuracy, I found that about 13% front of center is ideal for target shooting, 12 to 13.
Yep.
And peak accuracy and kinetic energy is about 16 to 18.
Yeah.
16 is typically where I tune for getting a hunting arrow set up.
Right. So I didn't do this stuff 4 or 5 years ago. I shot normal arrows, a 70-pound bow. I had 400 spine arrow shaft. I kind of half-assed it like everybody does. Just kind of didn't know any better. I honestly didn't. And when I hit 16%, it changed. It's a pretty easy arrow to build. That's a 525 grain, 300 spine arrow with a little bit of point weight. It's not a big, scary arrow, right? And that was when it seemed like I got better, and I didn't. The arrows flew a little better. I also learned the air shaft and tune a little bit better as well. It was all cohesive. The 16 seems to be the number with broadheads, where it starts to say, hey, it doesn't seem like I have to really work on form. Because I'm a golfer too, and God help us on the straight leg and keep your arms straight and all that, and go out of your mind. And
once I started tuning to 16, my customers started bringing in arrows and said, hey, I never get shoot throughs. And I've had every deer I shot this year shoot through.
Right.
And when I went up in the FOC. So I would say it does work.
It concentrates a little bit more mass in the front and turns the arrow into a tail. So you don't have a lot of weight behind the point, you have weight in the point. That seems to be the magic bullet. Ed's study, 27 years long and 1,300 animals, 19 was the magic bullet, but he was shooting a stick bow. So more to come on that. We're going to do a bunch of different studies. Ed's got 4 pages of notes for us at the foundation to start pounding. We were hoping to go to Australia and take a compound and repeat everything and see what happens, right? And I've asked him to his face, because of velocity, does it have to be 650 and 12 factors? And he said the best answer I've ever heard, because he's humble. And he shot 2 rhinos with a longbow, elephants, all the stuff. He said, I don't know. Is that a great answer out of that guy, right? You think he would just say, well, yeah, it's just one arrow. Already 27 years I did all this crap. He isn't like that at all. He's super cool. And it would be cool if we found that out. So you can take the math, what we talked about, right, straight, and then we start shooting big animals with it and say, does it perform like we say? And then the next level down, this is an educated audience. This is not the general public. So part of my mission with my crazy YouTube channel is just to help the average guy sitting in his backyard maybe play with his arrows more than just shoot a lot of reps. Maybe look at the rest and hold the bow like this and look down and see maybe it's that way. Just very simple stuff. I get a lot of encouraging emails from people who say, wow, I actually stood like this over my bow and it was like that. And I said, okay, well, put it there and see what happens. You can always put it back. You can turn the draw weight up or down and fiddle around. You can always put it back. But try. Don't just walk out like Big Lots store and say, I got it all fixed. Any other questions?
I got one.
Yes, sir.
Your bow is perfectly tuned, fixed blade, single level, on a whitetail. What weight arrow total do you not worry about the shoulder blade ever?
Oh, I just repeated. All right. So he's asking for the ultimate whitetail setup, assuming perfect tune. And what's my opinion on that? And I've been preaching 550 and 16% with a knot with a broadhead that will not break for 4 years. Nobody hears that because everybody says I'm the 1,000 grain arrow guy, and you just shoot them in the shoulder blade and break everybody's neck and call it good. I'm guilty of being accused of that. It's fine. But get to 550, that's what we're at, 16% right in there. If 510's flying and 525 or 550 is not, shoot 510. Vice versa. If you're just damn dead set that you can't give up 7 feet per second, but 550 is flying like a dart, come on. We've got to put the arrow on target. Right? I mean, it is a shot placement game with moving animals that are a pain in the ass. 90% of this business seems to be white-tailed deer. And they're annoying on the jumping thing. So, it's a range in there. Flight's got to happen. You can't, because you want to go fast, we can't have that. It just doesn't help you hit them, right? So, let's just say you chose to shoot a sloppier arrow because of whatever. Here, what it is. You got to shoot a giant single level that shoots sideways. Dumb idea. Okay? And you're grooving broadheads that big at 40, and you think that's good. And then the animals move. It's now that. It's now that with no predictability on what organs you're going to hit. Generally, it's up. Generally, it's a little bit less lethal, and the roll thing is terrible because it gives you one load. The roll thing is, from a physiologic standpoint, when they roll in a tree stand, is awesome because you get a perfectly shot through. They look like they've been shot from the ground because they roll like this, and the broadhead goes takes away the angle. But on the ground, when they roll, you see a lot of one lung hits, and it's an elevated hold. Blood trail is going to be reduced unless they bleed out of their nose, which their head's up. It takes a ton of blood to get up, to come out of the nose. You get something with its head down, like buffaloes, pigs and stuff, they tend to bleed out their face because their nose is physically below their lungs, and it's just pressure gap. That's it. It's plumbing, right? So that's that. Anybody else? Perfectly tuned. All right. Well, thank you very much for attending. I appreciate it very much. Putting up with me.